Hear my cry for truth, my cry for truth, my cry for you.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Hey Pastor podcast. I am Pastor Mark Lambert from Liberty Hill Baptist Church, where I serve my congregation as pastor, my wife as husband, my children as father, and to everyone I serve as an example that God does indeed choose the weak and foolish things of the world. Here I'm trying to answer a question that comes regarding morality. Where do we get morality? What is morality from? What is the source of morality? Specifically, there is the claim that morality comes from empathy, or that it's determined by or based on the harm or the benefit that comes from an activity. And so because of that, we have formed morality. And so we're going to address that question of, does empathy get us morality? But before I jump into that, I want to throw some honorable mention to apologist Timothy Fox, who I'm going to reference in the podcast. Timothy and I are both members of an organization called The Mentionables. It is a network of apologists and speakers and bloggers, and you can check out more information about that at thementionables.org. Make sure you include the definite article. You get something completely different if you just put in mentionables. So thementionables.org. They're small-time apologists that are worth mentioning. And there is a conference coming up. Stay tuned after the podcast. I'll give you a little commercial on that. But in a couple of weeks, middle of May, the Mentionables have their first national conference. More coming up about that after the episode. And so I also want to drop a little plug that at Liberty Hill, coming up this Sunday, just a few days from now, we have our second quarterly question and answer event of 2018. That's on April 29th at 6 p.m. From 6 to 7:30 p.m., I will be joined again by Reverend Dave Dover, by Patrick Cheney, by Kenneth Vaughn. We had such a great time last time with some good guys, smart guys, know their stuff, and we just have a good time answering questions that the audience poses to us right there on the spot. However, there we offer short answers. If you'd like a longer, more thought out, well-addressed answer, that's what this podcast is for. You can go to the website, heypastor.org, and submit a question there. So without further ado, let's get to answering this question about empathy and morality.
You don't know how it feels. You don't know how it feels. No, you don't know how it feels to be me.
So what is the basis of right and wrong? Virtually every aspect of our lives have some kind of moral component to them, especially where other people are concerned. So naturally, we should want to know the right thing to do so that we can do it. And likewise, we want to know the wrong thing to do so that we can avoid doing that. And whether it's how we behave on the job, how we treat our kids, how we drive, our political views, or which cell phone company we're going to do business with, everything we do can be informed by a moral consideration. The other consideration usually thrown into this mix is that we're looking for what makes morality objective. That is, we understand that morality entails this universal standard that will apply to all people in all places. And so subjective means that something is based on a person or persons idea defining what it is. But with subjective things, someone else can have a different definition, a different opinion, and theirs is just as valid as yours. Of course, that's not what we mean when we talk about morality. When we talk about morality, we're talking about things being objective. The question becomes, what is the right thing or the wrong thing to do? What defines morality? What are the various ways that the dictionary is going to define this word? There are several different ways that they will phrase this, but morality is basically the principles by which we distinguish between right and wrong or good or bad. Now, what are those principles? What makes one thing good or right and another thing bad or wrong? Well, I was recently told by a skeptical non-Christian that actual morality, scare quotes, that's his word, his exact words, actual morality has to do with empathy and whether or not an action causes harm or creates benefit. And he expressed an idea that echoes a common meme that is shared by atheists, which goes something like, you don't need religion to have morals. If you can't determine right from wrong, you lack empathy, not religion. Now, empathy is what supposedly he's claiming gives us morality. We don't need God to know morality. We just have empathy, and that's what gives us morality. We don't need God to have morals. We have empathy. But what is empathy? Okay, well, that's a good question. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Right? Empathy is the reason why we cry happy tears at weddings. It's why we look away from embarrassing scenes in movies. It's that feeling that moves us when we see someone hurting. It's how we often learn through examples. Empathy is not merely that we recognize what someone is going through, but that we actually can somewhat experience those feelings ourselves. So the claim here is that by the very fact that we can empathize with other people, we should know what is right or wrong. For instance, because we can understand how another person would feel if we stole from them, then we should know that stealing is wrong. Now, this seems kind of reasonable at first, but does it actually get the job done? Does this really give us morality? See, Christian apologist and teacher, blogger Timothy Fox wrote a recent article called Can Empathy Ground Morality? No. No, he includes the answer in the title because it's a profound and explicit no, it cannot. This article appeared on Sean McDowell's website. The link will be in the description. And in that article, he explains that someone who endorses empathy-based morality will say that good is whatever makes others feel happy, and evil is whatever makes people feel pain. Now, this sounds a lot like the golden rule, do unto others what you would have them do unto you in Matthew 7:12. And as Mr. Fox says, this may be a great way to determine how we should treat others, but to use empathy as the basis for morality is problematic. And he goes on to give 3 problems about why empathy does not measure up as the basis for morality. Number 1, it is subjective. And as I've already mentioned, we're looking for an objective standard, not just our personal preference or desire or definition, but something that applies to all mankind universally. 2, it is not obligatory. Right? Empathy is a feeling. We're no more obliged to follow our feelings of empathy than we are obliged to follow our feelings of anger or greed. And third, empathy lacks explanatory power. While it may help us to know what is right or wrong, it cannot explain why something is right or wrong. Now, he does a great job of breaking those down and explaining those in the article, so I don't want to repeat that here. You can go check out that article. It's a good read. I want to take a different route. Let's see how this actually works its way out where the rubber meets the road. Let's get practical. Not only do I think that empathy can't be the basis for morality, I think that trying to use it as the basis of morality can lead to all sorts of problems. Remember that discussion with the atheist that I mentioned who said that actual morality is a combination of empathy and harm or benefit analysis? Well, I want to examine 2 situations, 2 moral issues, to see if a sense of empathy combined with focusing on harm or benefit can tell us what the right or wrong thing to do really is. Now, as we go through these, it should be very obvious very quickly that simply feeling for someone's plight and trying to identify some harm or benefit will not get you to a moral conclusion. This is because most moral situations have to do with interactions between people, and people are complicated. Plus, if we're going to make the determination based on harm done or benefit received, don't we need to know what exactly constitutes a harm or a benefit? Do we mean the harm or benefit of the individual or for society? Does this mean the immediate harm or benefit, or should we consider a long-term harm or benefit? How you answer those questions are going to depend a great deal on other beliefs and experiences and background information. It is literally impossible for us to agree on the harm benefit of a particular situation. However, because issues about the existence of God and morality are not controversial enough, I'm going to jump us off into some real deep water, and we're going to look at two current controversial issues to see how this works out. And first, we're going to look at the abortion issue. Which one is it? Is it pro-life, or do you have a right to choose?
You must choose. But choose wisely.
Now notice, I'm not trying to argue for or against abortion. We can do a whole other show on that. That is not the point here. My point on that is not the question. The issue here is whether empathy can give us morality. Can empathy alone, or empathy with harm and benefit, actually tell us what the right thing is in the question of abortion? And as I hope you'll see, it cannot. So you're going to use empathy to help determine right or wrong regarding having an abortion. So do you have more empathy for the mother of an unwanted pregnancy? Or the unborn child whose only crime is being unwanted? Right? It's possible to empathize with either one or both. So how do we decide? Okay, so we need to consider the harm and benefit. But after all, that is what my atheist friend claimed. It's empathy plus this harm benefit thing. So do we focus on the harm of bringing an unwanted child into the world with unprepared parents and the benefits of terminating the pregnancy? But let's not be too hasty here. Think of the mother. Maybe she is living in poverty. Maybe she would end up being a single mom. Right? Is she still in school? Is she still a teenager? Well, what if she's seeking to establish what is shaping up to be a very promising career? She's not ready to have a baby. Can we not have empathy for this woman and see the harm that it's going to do for her life to be a mother at this point? Okay, but what about the harm to the child? Surely ending a human life qualifies as harm, and a pretty serious one. But then we have to also get into some other considerations. Right? If it's okay to kill an unwanted child because we empathize with the mother, is it okay to kill an abortion doctor because we empathize with the baby? But then what about empathy for the doctor? Right? Surely it's a harm to kill him, but it's also a harm to kill the baby. Now, I'm not saying here that it is okay to kill abortionists, but you can see how murky this water gets. Okay, so maybe we're thinking too small here. Maybe that's the problem. We're thinking too small. Let's not just look at the individual case, but let's look at the implications for all of society. Is it more beneficial to society to not have unwanted children? I mean, shouldn't we have empathy for not only the mother, but the children who are going to grow up in poverty? And we have a society with this problem of people, of orphans, and people who don't have intact families who are growing up. Is that really a society we want? Can we just judge the harm that will do for society? Or is it more harmful to be a people who think it's okay to kill unwanted children for the sake of convenience? Right? Could it not be argued that it's harmful to a society that we celebrate a lack of personal responsibility by fighting for a supposed right to avoid the consequences of our choices? Of course, if you are even remotely familiar with the abortion debate, you are suddenly having all of these other things that come rushing to mind. Is the unborn even alive? Do they have the right to be born? What about the woman's body? And all of a sudden, we see that we have all these other factors that come into play besides empathy and harm and benefit. So whichever the right thing is to do, empathy and this harm and benefit thing alone is not going to get us there. It's instead landing us right in the middle of a quagmire of relativism with as many possible right conclusions as you have people with opinions. Okay, so the abortion thing, maybe that's emotionally charged, right? Maybe that's kind of all these different points of view. So let's try something else. How about we talk about the morality of guns?
Good, bad. I'm the guy with the gun.
So what about the gun issue? I mean, surely that's a straightforward. We got children being gunned down in the halls of their schools. Certainly that's something we can all agree on, that something must be done. People are dying and being gunned down where they should have felt safe. This one's a no-brainer, right? Well, let's take it and examine it through the lens of empathy and harm and benefit. So who do you empathize with? You automatically want to empathize with the victims, but let's stop a second. Let's back up. What if you are the counselor who is feeling empathy for that troubled teenager sitting across your desk from you that has that bad home life, that had that bad start, that just got an unfair shake? And you know they're troubled, but you also, your heart breaks for them and their situation, and you just want to help. And so despite any red flags or warning signs that might be there, your empathy leads you to do nothing. But then you fast forward and you didn't know it was going to happen. It's a statistical improbability. But had you noticed, but your empathy led you to do nothing, but you fast forward and now this kid is shooting up his school, killing his classmates. So shouldn't we empathize with the victims over the troubled kid? Well, not all troubled kids are going to shoot places up. But let's empathize with the victims. And in our pain for the plight that we feel for the victims, we want to take away guns so that these tools of killing are no longer readily available. We stop and we think about the situation, and our hearts hurt for those who have to endure this. But what about those responsible, law-abiding citizens whose guns that we are seeking to take are banned? Should we not also empathize with them and their inability to protect themselves? Why are they being punished for what someone else did? What is the harm and benefit of the situation? But again, maybe that scale is too small. Let's think about the implications for society. Right? Is the harm so great for having guns in society that is worth taking them away, that is necessary? Is the benefit of a gun-free society so great that it outweighs other concerns? Or is it possibly a great harm for society that we would disarm a population and make the people helpless in their own homes and on the streets of their cities, or even in the face of a tyrant? At this point is when generally we'll start to argue about statistics and historical experience and different types of guns and what different kinds of guns and ammunition are needed and for what, and what people need to own and should own. And okay, we can have that conversation, but that's bringing a ton of other factors into the conversation that go beyond simple empathy and a harm-benefit analysis. Who we empathize with and how we calculate the benefit and the harm is going to greatly depend on our own backgrounds and cultural influences. So when we talk about morality, the definition of what is right or wrong, that's what we mean. It's a standard that will affect laws, impact lives of everyone else in society. It simply does not get us to where we are trying to go to base these things on such a flimsy and shifting basis as our own subjective feelings and our opinions regarding what we think is going to be harmful or beneficial, which necessarily will be limited because as a human being, we are quite obviously limited in our knowledge and the scope of what we can see consequences might be. So if it can't be empathy or this harm or benefit thing, then what is it that defines morality? What is the thing which forms the foundational principles of morality that apply to all people in all places? Because that's what morality is. Well, remember, there were three things that Mr. Fox shared. We look back at that article, and he says reasons why empathy cannot be it: because it is subjective, it does not have any obligatory power, and it has no explanatory power. It cannot explain why something is good or bad. Then whatever the right thing is, whatever the right answer is, it will be the opposite. That means it will be objective. It will apply to all humanity. It will give us an obligation to obey, and it will have an explanation of why good is good and bad is bad. So what do we know that can give us an objective obligation to behave morally, and that explains why something is bad, not just how we know it is bad? Well, in order for morality to be objective, the source or the grounding or the foundation, whatever you want to call it, of morality, it cannot be human beings or any system that we devise. If it applies to all people, then it cannot come from any people. If it does, it is not objective and it loses its obligatory power. We have no reason to be obligated to someone else's idea. So what sources do we have outside of mankind that can give us an objective moral obligation? Here's a hint. Obligations involve persons. We do not have obligations to inanimate objects or plants or even animals. Obligations typically entail authority. Right? In school, you're obligated to turn in your homework because an authority, right, a person in authority declared it so. And there are consequences when you don't. Something like, I don't know, maybe you almost fail high school and you need to attend a work at your own pace private school in order to catch up and graduate on time. Or maybe that was just me. But the point is that obligation comes from persons in authority. Well, when it comes to a moral standard that applies universally to all humanity, what do you call a person who has authority over all humanity with the power and sovereignty to declare right and wrong and create a moral obligation? Gee, I don't know. I usually just call him God, though he goes by many different names. Yahweh or Jehovah, if you prefer. Jesus Christ, Father. It's all kinds of different things we might call him, but there's only one person that fits the bill for that description. And so I don't want to get into this. This is a great discussion for a different podcast. There's different reasons why we might explain how it is that God grounds morality. Is it in his nature, the design, the commands? Those of my friends who are a little more philosophically inclined love to wrestle through those ideas, and those are fun conversations to have. But my point here, and I think we've made it, is that this idea that empathy is what gives us morality simply does not stand up to the test. If you're going to have morality, you need to have obligation and explanation. And it has to be objective beyond mankind. Empathy will not get you that. It cannot. Morality, by definition, universally applies. That means it is a moral law, and a moral law requires a moral lawgiver. So, in conclusion, morality itself, by its very nature, is objective. I'd go so far as to say that subjective morality is actually an oxymoron. We're looking for a standard that applies to all people, so we need a source that is outside of ourselves. Empathy and harm cannot give us that standard. They are subjective and they give no obligation to obey them. Contrasted against a sovereign creator who transcends mankind, and we find a basis for morality that is objective, carries an obligation, and through which we can understand not just if something is good or bad, but why it is good or bad. Empathy will never get us there, but God does.
Hear me now, Lord, I'm calling for you to find me here, to find me here. Hear me now, Lord.
Okay, well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Hey Pastor podcast. If you have a question you would like to ask, to have answered on this podcast, go to heypastor.org. You can submit your questions there. Or we have the question and answers. Check out the website. We have all of the questions and answers that were given from past Q&A events. You can browse through those. Also, the Q&A event coming up on April 29th. Hopefully, if technology cooperates, it will be live streamed. And so check out the website for more information about that. If you are within striking distance of Moody, I would love to see you there at the Q&A. If not, tune in, check out the website, drop us a line through the website. But now I also, like as I said, I promise, so here it is, The Mentionables, fantastic organization, have a conference coming up. I wish I could get across the country to go to it myself. If you can, that's awesome. If you're in the area, please attend. These guys are really smart, and I think they're worth your time to listen to what they have to say.
They are a small grassroots team of apologetic speakers, each of whom has their own small grassroots ministry. Then one day they had an idea. It started almost as a joke, but quickly ballooned into a full-fledged ministry plan. Gathered together as bloggers, podcasters, vloggers, and writers, each with their own small voice, but drowned out and passed over by the grandeur of celebrity apologists. From the eastern seaboard to the west coast and various locations in between, they come from different backgrounds, but they share one great message. This journey of these thinkers, each with his own small influence in some small corner of the Christian apologetics world, will finally converge in one location. They will meet one another for the very first time. This is a team of speakers like no other. Among them is a man who has struggled against seizures and brain surgery, and yet has remained brilliant in his defense of the gospel. A former atheist whose conversion to Christianity now has him battling the worldview he once held. A former gospel rapper whose ministry on behalf of urban believers fights for racial reconciliation. An elementary school teacher who strives to make apologetics accessible to the everyman. And finally, a man with Asperger's syndrome married to a woman with Asperger's syndrome. His passion, along with apologetics, is to keep the church informed on matters of how to minister to the autistic brothers and sisters in their midst, and of the treasure that his unconventional marriage has been to him. In May of 2018, the group, now known as The Mentionables, will hold its very first national conference in Greensboro, North Carolina. This unusual group, The Mentionables, which came together almost by accident, now invite you to join them. Come see their messages united. Come see what small voices can do to present one loud noise for the kingdom. Join us for Mentionable, the conference 2018. For more information, visit the Mentionables Facebook group page or contact Greensboro Christian Church at 336-621-5226. Mentionable, the conference. Many small voices present one big message.